Welcome to Scanner School. We teach you everything to know about the scanner radio hobby. Today's podcast is sponsored by this month's webinar, Why Every Scanner User Needs an SDR, the number one underrated tool that should be in your setup. This free live webinar has been rescheduled and is now set for March 23rd, 2021 at 8 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. Virtual seats are still limited, and you can sign up at scannerschool.com/webinar. If you're listening after the newly rescheduled webinar date, you can catch the replay at scannerschool.com/webinar. All the notes from today's podcast can be found on our website at scannerschool.com/session168. Before we start this week's podcast, I'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. Patreon is a month-to-month sponsorship platform. We have 3 different support tiers, each with different benefits. But the most valuable tier is our $5 a month tier. This equates to sponsoring the podcast for about $1 per episode. Now, not only do our $5 Patreon supporters receive the podcast early, but they also receive a commercial-free version of the podcast delivered directly to their podcast player. Some may say that the included Squelchy sticker pack that is mailed to your home is the best benefit of the $5 level, but I think it's the community or the club that is growing at this level. You see, we meet once a month on Zoom, and we have a roundtable discussion about scanning, ask questions, offer advice. Some of the members are answering other people's questions, and we just talk with our fellow Scanner School classmates. This is an exclusive group for our $5 Patreon members. Now, again, if all this wasn't enough at that level, you'll also receive discounts to upcoming Scanner School courses and offerings. Now, you can help support Scanner School by going to www.scannerschool.com/Patreon or www.scannerschool.com/support. Now, I'd like to thank all of our Patreon supporters at all levels, and they are Blurpy Benner, Brian King, Buzz Gold, Chris Paris, Craig Harper, Dan, David C., Denny Crotty, Ed Walsh, Eddie K., Edward Bramblett, Evan Barak, Gary Fletcher, Guy Lee, James Broxson, James Felling, James Peruta, Jeff Block, Jenny Taylor, Jim Heinrich, John Goldenberg, Ken Newberry, Kevin Zwicky, Lenny Bauer, Les Stevenson, Mark Beebe, Mason Kramer, Michael Kroger, Paul Teal, Raymond Hill, Richard Armstrong, Robert Kanzler, Ronnie Bach, Sal Marandola, Tim Mazza, Ted Glendy, and William R. Cand. Now let's start the podcast.
Welcome to The Scanner School, a podcast dedicated to the scanner radio hobby. Class is about to begin. Here is your host, Phil Lichtenberger.
Hi, my name is Phil Lichtenberger, and my amateur radio call sign is W2LIE. And let me say welcome to Scanner School. This podcast is here to teach you everything to know about the scanner radio hobby. And as a reminder, we are looking to help you with your scanner radio questions. If there's something that about this hobby that has you stumped, has you stumbling over something, right? Fill out the form on our website. We can answer your question on an upcoming podcast. Fill out the form or click on the speak pipe button at scannerschool.com/ask, or even leave us a voicemail, 516-308-2885. We'll answer your question on a future Ask Scanner School episode, which releases on the first Tuesday of every month. And one lucky person will receive a free tutoring session if they leave us a voicemail or speak pipe question. Again, scannerschool.com/ask. Now, if this is your first week joining us for class or your weekly listener, welcome to this week's podcast. Today we have Greg Weamer on the podcast, and today's topic is Greg's idea. See, Greg reached out to me via the Scanner School website, and he clicked on the guest button on the top of the screen. And if you have an idea for the podcast and you would like to be a guest, I hope that you will do the same. See, Greg is here today to talk about how he uses his software-defined radio in place of a traditional scanner. Greg's current location has simulcast issues, and by using an SDR, it's one of the cheapest ways to overcome issues of P25 simulcast reception issues. So, without any more delay, let's just jump into today's conversation between myself and Greg, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed speaking with Greg. Greg, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on today's podcast. And more importantly, I want to thank you for actually reaching out to me with this idea for a podcast, which I think is a perfect idea being where we are right now in our podcasting series. So, Greg, thank you so much for being a guest on today's podcast.
Hey, Phil, thanks for having me.
It's all my pleasure. So you reached out to talk about software-defined radios, which is exactly where we are right now in our podcasting journey. But before we get there, let's get a little bit of a background. What is your background with the scanner radio hobby?
My quick background would be been mildly interested in it off and on throughout the years. Started when I was a kid. My grandparents had a Bearcat Electra 4 crystal scanner, 8-channel. And, you'd be able to hear the police calls and fire calls on that when I was younger. And I always thought that was pretty cool. Got in my teens and I was able to get a hold of a Bearcat 210, 10-channel digital. So more of that, kind of similar thing. And then back in the late 90s, I treated myself back in the day to a Sport Cat 150. And I think that had 10 banks of 10, if I remember right. I haven't looked at it in a few years, and it had aviation on there. I wanted that. And it just had great coverage. And of course, that was back well before anything digital happened. So, and maybe 10 or 15 years after that, I kind of just got out of it and haven't spent much time with it. But I've gotten more into it lately and got my amateur radio license a few years ago. So I've started playing around more with it lately.
Yeah, congratulations on getting your ham ticket. That's always a bonus. And sometimes these hobbies, they kind of go hand in hand and one leads into the other. Sometimes they start in the ham and come back to scanning, or scanning go into ham, but it's one of those deals. They kind of go nicely together. So are you still using that same hardware? I mean, because I'm looking over my shelf over there and I can see a Bearcat 4 over there, the old Electra crystal control scanner. And I never had a sports cat, but I remember that. It's putting the picture in my head, right? That's the one with the blue faceplate with the giant up and down arrows, I believe it was. But if I remember correctly. But those were all, great radios during the day. So good choices.
Yeah, the Sport Cat was black. It's handheld. They kind of promoted it a lot as you could listen to NASCAR with it. I think they also had a yellow version of it.
Okay.
Bright yellow. It had a rubber ducky, BNA connector on there. It worked great. It had definitely had trouble with what's known as intermod. So because at the time I was living in Minneapolis, and there's just, of course, lots of RF there, and it would have trouble with that once in a while. But that was the late 90s.
Right. And don't forget, too, you had paging that was very big back then, too. So if you were in a busy area like that, you were just getting swamped and slammed in all directions. So, but nice setup. And what are you using today?
Today, I, believe it or not, do not have a hardware scanner at all. And part of the reason of that is I had a BCD 325P2 for a while, maybe a year ago, and I bought that used. And you kind of know where I'm going with this.
I know. I can tell exactly where you're
going.
Where I'm going.
Living here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, I had simulcast problems. And I was also messing around with my first SDR experience, which was Unitrunker. And I noticed I was hearing things that the scanner would just not pick up, or it would pick up quickly, then drop. And then it might have been around the time I heard your podcast talking about simulcast issues. I said, that's got to be it. And as time's gone on, I just can't fight it here in this metro area. It's just, you're going to have to be software defined. So I sold that. I do not have a hardware scanner right now.
Okay. But again, it sounds like you don't need one, because from what you're name dropping right now, it sounds like you've got a pretty good solution to help you out with that one. So you kind of got sucked into the SDR side of the hobby out of necessity.
Yeah, that, and I was, just starting to play around with these RTL SDR dongles, following the websites and the Twitter feed for them. And more I played with it, I'm like, I ran into Unitrunker. Like, I really want to be able to listen to this P25 Phase 1 system we have in the metro area, and because everything's on it.
Right.
So I started playing around with Unitrunker. That's what started, and it worked okay. It was my first experience with P25 SDR trunking. I just had 2 dongles at the time. You set one up for the voice channel, one other for the control channel. And it was in Windows environment. So I was familiar with Windows. So that was my first start.
I was going to say first mistake, but no.
And I didn't know a thing about Linux back in the day. So I'll as we talk, I'll tell you a little more about the journey. I struggled with Unitrunker. I could never get it to work really that well. The early dongles I have weren't, the temperature compensated type now. So they're constantly drifting around. And I couldn't tell, is it on the control channel? Is it drifting? And it didn't seem like there was any active development by the developer. You needed the virtual audio cable to feed out the digital signal into DSD Plus for decoding. So it took a fair amount of configuring to get it to work at all.
Right. Now, that was Unitrunker version 1, right, that you were playing around with?
Right. And I've heard that there's some other version of it out there that's actively being developed.
Yes. All of his attention is being done on Unitrunker version 2. And let me tell you, it is light years above and beyond where Unitrunker 1 is currently at. But again, it's all alpha release, so it's constantly being patched and debugged. And of course, when you patch something, you introduce more bugs. And if you look at the Unitrunker website, I think he's got a link to version 2, and that one is only built around software-defined radios. So even the UI looks a whole lot different. It's a lot cleaner and easier to read, and the font type is crisp. So if you haven't looked at Unitrunker in a while, it may be time just to go ahead and revisit that for a little bit. But he's actively doing some developments. In fact, he even came up with some numbers of how many release candidates he came up with last year. And I don't want to say the wrong number, but he was saying that it's going to be a very hard number to match this year because they came up with so many revisions last year. So very, very active with development.
Is that a fee-based solution then?
No, it's all free. No, it's
okay.
You definitely go to unitrunker.com, and I think you go to look for the link for version 2. But if you're also on Google Groups, he has a Google group that he runs, and Rick will let you right in on that one, and that's where he kind of spills the beans as far as what's coming, what's being developed, what's on the table, what's getting backburnered. And a lot of people are just having discussions on there, can't get it running, or they see this is a problem. So it's a really good, it's just a mailing list basically. But you see a lot more on there than you see on website forums as far as what's going on with Unitrunker.
Okay. Sounds like I need to check that out. I checked on it last night, and I'm still hitting on the old website. It looks like last development was 2015. So
okay.
Yeah, I need to check that out.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
My next experience, so I'd struggle with that. The next one I ran into was something called SDR trunk. Mm-hmm. And I think you've alluded to this once in a while. I liked it a lot more. I found it easier to configure than Unitrunker. It had a spectrum and waterfall display, so you could see how centered you were on the control channel. Better user interface. It was platform agnostic, so you could be it on Windows or a Linux machine. Built-in digital decoding, so it's nice. I didn't have to mess around with the virtual audio cable and decoder. And it had it could do all kinds of digital modes. It did phase 1, phase 2, LTR, and others that I'd never heard of. Looks like it does LTR, and didn't do DMR, but there's plenty of other subtypes in there. Mm-hmm. You could turn off and on. You could turn. It was all these software-defined radios have one thing that's very frustrating: is a lot of the user interfaces aren't the greatest, and importing talk groups from radio reference is a challenge. It's got to be formatted right. It's got to be either in an XML file or a JSON file, and there's plenty of time. I've spent hours and hours getting that formatting right.
Right.
But you could turn off and on banks of the talk groups, which was nice. Mm-hmm. And you could record. And I think you could stream from it, too, if you wanted to stream to your local network.
Yes, Trunk or SDR Trunk or Trunk SDR allows you to do that and create playlists, too, which is cool. So you can just look at one talk group. And you run the version now at basically watches like every frequency that the SDR can cover and just watches all those talk groups that are in that spectrum, or was that before?
So at the time, I only had 2 dongles, and I didn't even have the temperature compensated dongles. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it worked pretty well. I was catching a lot of stuff, and I used it for quite a while. And one of my main goals was I really wanted to get this so I could run this like on a Raspberry Pi and just keep it on 24/7 and pull it up as I wanted to. If I wanted to pull it up on the tablet or the phone, I could just listen to it versus I got to go down and sit in front of the computer and listen to it there.
Yep. Gotcha. I know exactly where you're going with your project. Yep. This is going to be an exciting podcast. And also too, and just so people who are listening right now, that you don't get, that sour taste for SDRs. We're talking right now about the early versions of software-defined radio, the early hardware, the earlier software. There's been plenty of hardware development between what sounds like the time when you started and also when I started. And you're right. The original hardware was ridiculous. It was great because it was new and it did something very exciting. But it was a challenge to get configured exactly right. And you were always tweaking it to bring it back onto center. I don't know if you started around the same time I did, but I used to use DMR decode to decode DMR transmissions. And in order to do that one, you had to load CYGYN on your computer, which was like a Linux emulator that ran on top of Windows. And then once you had that running, then you had to load DMR decode on top of that. And also, I think DSD Plus at the time, maybe it was just DMR decode, but you had to run all this stuff before you can get there, right? Yeah, you had to train the computer to know how to run the software. Even early days of like Trunker 88, which was just a Motorola Type 2 and I think it was a Type 1, but it's definitely a Type 2 trunk tracker. Again, that one eventually had the ability to run an SDR, but you still had to run this Java library that ran first. And that was mostly a DOS-based program. So there was a lot of things that you had to do and had to do right in order to just tune anything analog-based, basically, on your SDR. I mean, those days are thankfully behind us, but you had to be dedicated, right, when you got started in order to do this.
Yeah, and it makes me think back to when I was running, I'd be running Unitrunker, and I'd have the DSD decoder in the other window, and I'd see, as it's flowing by, you can see the signal strength, and signal strength would go high, it would drop, and it would just, you get broken transmissions, or you get, garbled transmissions because the signal wasn't very good or it wasn't centered, and it was frustrating. But yeah, I spent a lot of time on that, as you probably did too.
I spent hours building discriminator taps to run into Unitrunker, and also into I believe that DSD Plus at one point allowed you to bring audio in from there as well. I remember playing around with that for quite some time, but yeah, there was a whole window where this was just all brand new and exciting, and where we are now, I still think that that was the epicenter, right? But we're still at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what's coming, and I think that there's the whole world of the development that's still to come when it comes to SDR. But it's still ground floor right now. For anybody who's just starting out now, you just saved yourself the headache. That's all you did. Guys like me and you, Greg. It's we've spent a couple of nights banging our heads against the wall. It would have been easier to go out to the garage and slam our thumbs with a hammer, but we did it.
Yeah, there's many nights like you look at the clock. Okay, it's 9:00. Okay, look at it again. Okay, it's 11. It's like I got to work tomorrow. I've spent way too much time on this, but that's part of the fun. I think is the challenge, and when it does work, it's self-rewarding, and you're learning stuff, and that's never a bad thing.
Right, and that's exactly it. I mean, you're looking at things with a software-defined radio that typically is transparent to the end user, right? We don't see things like a waterfall display or, the magic eye, when you're looking at P25, or even the upper layer management control of a trunk system, right? Unitrunker doesn't show all that information. I mean, I used the old Pro 96 COM when I was also using Unitrunker when I was feeding scanners in with the serial ports, right? Again, a lot of that stuff now is all yesterday's product. There's no need to have to go out and spend $300 and something on a scanner just to plug it into a computer so you can watch a control channel. Right. I mean, now it's $30. Right. So it's the entry point is like, just do it. Yeah.
And as far as these RTL dongles, I've gotten into now as my journey's got on, I've gotten into the temperature compensated ones. And it's one of those things, I'm not going back because you don't have to mess with this drifting. PPM correction is 0. It's fine. It's stable. It gets hot. It doesn't drift like some of the older RTLs, SDRs I have. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, it's definitely matured, and again, the things keep changing, right? I mean, just recently they had to replace the chipsets in these RTL dongles as well. It's the same chip, just different number, basically, and things will just keep improving as things happen, and more people are doing different things with them, and I think that we're going to see things will definitely be better. But so, how many RTL SDR dongles do you have set up right now?
Like 8 of them.
Oh, something like 8 of them?
Yeah, something like 8 of them, because I'm running a Raspberry Pi with an ADSB receiver, and I've got 3 of them hanging off of that.
Okay.
Just because I'm watching ADSB 1090 ES and 978 UAT. So I got both those, and I'm both feeding those into PiAware, and I'm running virtual radar web server off there, and I do some stuff with take that and put it into an SQLite file and do some analytics on it. It's really easy, and I'm not a developer, but it's pretty interesting what you can do at home with free software anymore.
Yes, yeah, it is. So you've got 3 on a Raspberry Pi. And where else do you have other SDRs plugged into?
I've got another Raspberry Pi down here in the office here. That's the one I've kind of used as my development experimental one. I've got 3 others off on my old laptop. It's like a 12-year-old bare bones laptop, and that is the one I'm running what I call the Cadillac of SDR radios right now, and that is Trunk Recorder.
Okay.
Which I believe is OP25 based on, if I understand things correctly. And it's Trunk Recorder in combination with, I don't know if you've heard of something called RDIO scanner.
Yes. Haven't heard that in a while, but yes.
And what it is I love it. It does something that I don't even think the SDS 100 or 200 does. The way Trunk Recorder works is really different than these other ones work. Is you need enough RTLs to cover your spectrum. So like for my area, like my site that I'm monitoring, there's 10 megahertz I need to cover all the voice channels and the control channels. So I need basically 4 SDR RTLs because each one's 2.5 megahertz.
Close to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And and this is where, and when Trunk Recorder is probably the most difficult to configure. I've spent a lot of time. I'd give it a 9 out of 10 as far as difficulty. It's got JSON files that need to be just perfect, both on the Trunk Recorder and the RDIO scanner page. But what's great about it is there's one killer app about it, and that is it isn't just monitoring the control channel. And then when it sees a call in your talk group and jumps over to that talk group, it's monitoring all the voice channels at the same time.
Yes, and that's how the Broadcastify ingest server is basically set up and doing this now.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And you can feed it from Trunk Recorder.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love that. So with my setup, I've got 20 quote virtual recorders. And the RDIO scanner is a web interface that takes this feed and has a great UI. You can turn talk groups on and off. It stores them and records them, and it queues them up. Say there's a
yes,
call
that's the beautiful thing.
Yes, and if there's a call on fire dispatch and there's another call on state police, normally, correct me if I'm wrong, on an SDS you're going to miss that second call, right?
Because you can only monitor one voice path at a time or one frequency at a time. So when the scanner leaves the control channel to go to the voice channel, it then goes back to the control channel after A, the transmission drops off that trunk talk group, and B, when your delay timer is satisfied.
Right.
So yes, you would miss that and that's why people run with multiple scanners. But I'll let you continue.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's what the quote unquote pros do. Is they have a bank of scanners set up in a rack, and they just monitor certain bands or certain searches, so they don't miss anything. With this app, you don't miss anything, and you can see and depending how many you're watching, you can see the numbers queuing up. You can see your calls queuing up, so you don't miss anything. I just love that. And plus then I can and because of the way the audio streaming is set up, I can use it anywhere in the house. I can pull up the tablet, pull up the phone. I can just start it right there and listen to it.
Right, because it's a web interface.
Right.
There's no special hardware or requirements. As long as you can surf a web, you can monitor that. And I've seen development, with OP25 through a couple people that are making their own web interfaces, so you can just do exactly that. So instead of using, the standalone web interface, you actually have what looks like a heads-up display.
Yep.
And the same controls that you'd have on a hardware, but through a tablet interface.
Right. Exactly. And like I say, I think OP25 is the foundation for Trunk Recorder because I've dug through some of the directory structure and I see it in there.
Okay.
Because OP25 is great too, but it behaves like a regular scanner does. It's watching the control channel. It sees it's, I think, virtually scanning through your list of talk groups and says, fire dispatch, jumps to the frequency. You hear that call, and then it jumps back to the control channel. What's nice about like OP25 is you only need one dongle. because it's just going to jump back and forth. So you can, and it's not hardware intensive. You can run that on a Raspberry Pi all day, every day, and have a web interface. The trouble is you don't have audio going over the web. There's things in there, and on the developer's page they run something called Icecast, which is another streaming service. The trouble with that is it's delayed. It's delayed by 2 or 3 seconds behind what you're visually seeing. Minimum. It drove me just nuts.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm like, there's got to be something better. And when I found Trunk Recorder, I'm like, they've solved it. And along with this RDIO scanner, it's nice. And RDIO, and it's got the ability to a Trunk Recorder has archives, so I can go back 7 days, 2 days, as much as you want. You can all configure that in those JSON files. The frustrating thing, like I said, is those JSON files are very touchy.
Yes.
One comma, a quotation, something out of the way, and it's crash. It won't. And like I say, I'm not a Java developer. The answers, when it crashes, it's kind of cryptic. So you got to search around the web and say, what does this mean? Didn't have a quote here, or I forgot a colon. Yep. That'll do it. So, but yeah, that's my favorite right now. On that.
Yeah. And in fact, when I first started with Trunk Recorder, you had to put the Java runtime environment on. And if you went to a Java runtime environment that was too new, you couldn't load Trunk SDR. You had to fall back to the older version of it. And the old version of Trunk SDR was again, like anything else, was a real pain in the neck to set up. So I don't know if you've updated lately. I mean, lately it's really nice and really easy to set up, but the older version was a real pain. So I don't know what flavor you're running or when you last did an update.
Maybe a few months ago, and I know both Trunk, especially RDIO scanners under active development. So
yeah,
that's nice to see. Any of these that are getting active development is nice to see.
Yes, and again, I think it's where it is right now. There's so many things out there that are doing a lot of the same stuff that there's room for it though, because again, it's a free piece of software, and it does allow for people to pick and choose which one they want, and everything kind of runs together, and each one has a strength and each one kind of has a weakness. So there's a strong point for Trunk SDR, there's a strong point for Unitrunk, there's a strong point for DSD Plus, there's OP25, and there's others that we didn't even mention yet, but yeah, it's unbelievable. So
yeah, and you probably can kind of guess where I'm on. I know what I'd really love out of an SDR setup, and anyone out there in the Uniden product development community, here it is. I've got an RSP, one of those SDR Uno RSP 1As. Great $100 SDR radio, great frequency coverage, 10 megahertz bandwidth of coverage at one time. So it's a big step up from an RTL SDR, and there's a bunch of other ones, Hack RF and
Yep.
Make the software interface that just ties into that box, and put the trunking in there, put the decoding in there. They come up with that, I'll be like, please take my money. Because I really think that's where the next SDR development is going to be. It's going to be on your computer. You're going to plug a USB cable into one of these boxes, and everything else is going to be software. They can change the user interface around. They can add different types of decoding for DMR, whatever, NXDN. Even if it's enter a code, buy a code, and enter it in. I think it might be the last, SDS 100, 200 might be the last fully hardware-based radios around. It'll still be a portable version, but if you want a home version, I think it's just going to be software you download and hook it into a box.
That's kind of like the point we're at now with the software you download and you just plug it into a box with the software defined radio. But you're right though. If somebody came along that was a developer that was a commercial product, maybe bought the rights to some of these, just speculating here, folks, right? Just bought the rights to some of the software that's being developed now, and took that under their umbrella, or again, too, my theory in the scanner radio world right now is that you'll continue to see hardware developed by Uniden and hopefully Whistler, but somebody somewhere is going to make a black box that has a touchscreen display on it that is SDR driven. And again, maybe it's somebody that has a Raspberry Pi with the Zero, which is a really tiny one, that has an RTL mini on it, that has the SMA connector to go to an antenna and a touchscreen display. You don't really need much more than that. Or they've got two RTL mini dongles in there that are wide connected to an antenna. This way you can monitor a control channel and a voice channel. Again, it's really going to be something somewhere. And somebody actually does, I think it's these guys are going to kill me now. There is a P25X or something like that. There is a black box out there now that does phase 1 trunking all through a black box, and you just run their web interface, which again is OP25 based, and it does allow you to do that. I just can't think of the name of the interface box right now, but stuff like that is and again too, you go back to the old days like the ICOM computer controls hardware and the Win Radio and stuff like that, right? I mean, it was still black box. You had the computer controlled interface, but you're always limited by what that hardware was, right? If you wanted PL and your hardware didn't support PL, you were up the creek. Whereas with today's SDRs and software dongles, you want PL, you just enable it in the software.
Right.
It's just the interface. It's where the rubber meets the road, basically, in your RF environment.
Right. Yeah, and to the manufacturers out there, I think they've got to get on this, because you look at what the open source free community is doing it, and these people are just doing it for free and putting this stuff out on GitHub. And if they keep updating it and revising it, it does nothing but get better. They fix bugs, they add features. If they would get to the point where some of these developers would start adding dialog boxes in there, where it'd make it really, just keep improving the GUI and the usability, it's going to change things.
Yep. And I'm pretty set on somebody's going to shake the market up with a third party. And I don't know who the third party would be. I mean, some people say it would be Unication with the leak that they have that has that page that looks like a scanner. But I think somebody somewhere is just going to say, hey guys, here's my Kickstarter campaign, and this is what I'm going to be working on. And I've already said publicly too, if somebody's got a Kickstarter like that, I'll back that. Right. Because that to me is awesome. But again, we're at a point right now where it is a time investment, right, to set up your software-defined radios. There is always going to be that market for the easy way, right? So if somebody just wants to take it out of a box and turn it on, and again, you and I, we don't mind sitting there and poking away at something on a computer, but I mean, 9 times out of 10 too, if somebody were to give us a box and say, hey, this will do everything you're trying to waste an entire weekend doing, guess what I'm going to do? Right.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's almost already there. And if you've got applications like Sentinel, which are used for programming radios, you bolt that on to some other software that's doing the decoding and ability to trunk it. I mean, you're there. Yep.
Yeah, I know my project that I want to work on. I know somebody's working on something very similar to this. And I'm not saying I want to do the exact same thing. I'm just saying in theory here, in New York State, it is illegal to have a scanner in your vehicle. Right? You can have a radio in your car that's capable of picking up outside of the spectrum, and this was in order to get amateur radio operators the ability to put their own radios in a car, right? Because you and I both know that the typical ham transceiver will receive outside of the ham bands. So that little blanket doesn't make every single amateur radio, two-way radio, illegal to have in your vehicle. Again, it would also protect anybody with GMRS, but I don't think it's written that way. But anyway, the way that I read the law is, even if you have the amateur license, and some people read it differently, but you can't have a scanner in your vehicle. But I don't have a scanner in my vehicle if I have a Raspberry Pi with an RTL dongle on. That's not a scanner. You know what I'm saying?
Not
and you know where I'm going with this thing.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're going.
So now if I mount that in my vehicle and then use my phone's web interface to connect or Bluetooth over to my Raspberry Pi running OP25, and I start streaming scan lists that I have, I don't have a scanner in my car. You know what I mean? So it is. And again, what really worried me about SDRs up front when we first got started with those DVB-T dongles and the garbage hardware was that somebody was going to realize that this hardware was available and they were going to put the stop to it. Now, how many years has it taken for Baofeng is still on the market with their radios and what their radios can do. And Amazon's finally starting to put some language into play about their radios. And it's been how many years? So I think that we still have plenty of time before somebody wakes up on, the RTL SDR world. But again, the scanner radio world was pretty quiet until somebody decided to do something stupid with it to the wrong person, and then all of a sudden a law is created.
Right.
And that's how things happen. Right. So, it's an interesting world right now where it comes to the hobby. And again, there's software out there. Basically, if you want to do it with a radio, there's software out there that can kind of help you along. Now, we're not talking about encryption or decryption. Again, OP25 allows you to plug modules into the software flowchart, but it still requires you to have the key. So it's not doing anything, illegal anyway. But again, some of the things that you can do with SDR software and hardware that you can't do at a commercial-based scanner is stuff like tetra decoding, right? Or the other methods of LTR. Even was it MP 1327? I think is it MPT 1327. I think is the other one that there's no hardware out there that does it, but your SDR can. Even telemetry-based type of things and POGSAG and even two-tone detect, right? I mean, even something as simple as that. Today's scanners will allow you to work as a pager and play audio, but two-tone detect allows you to take your radio and pipe it into your computer and then record the audio, and then you can send it out to a transcription service or email you the file. And again, you can just use SDR Sharp with a virtual audio cable to feed that in, and again, you're off to the races. So there's a lot of stuff you can do.
Yeah, well, and as you know, I mean, SDR, whether it be an RTL dongle or an RSP or some other, hack RF, that's just receiving the signal. It's not doing any decoding or processing. It just dumps the raw INQ, feeds it through some conversion so you can feed it into a USB cable, and the rest is all in the computer that's doing all the manipulation, the decoding, and whatever. So the real technology is in the software and the user interface and how that works. Yes. That's where the gold is.
Yes. Yep. And that's the software and the software-defined radio.
Yeah, so. And and it's limitless. Like I say, you can change user interfaces around. You can do the decoding, all that stuff, and it's pretty interesting. There's no doubt any radio in any of the future, whether it be amateur or whatever, is going to have some software-defined component to it. It's just.
And that's what we're seeing too. Like even in the amateur world, is the very high-end ICOM and Yaesu radios. And I think even the new Kenwood now is they've all got software-defined radios in it, right? You've got that waterfall display as you tune around the HF dial to see where existing QSOs might happen to be. So you're not just scanning a dial; you're actually watching something over time with the waterfall. So that makes things very cool. And I definitely think that software-defined radios will be more of what's under the hood. I mean, like today, like compared to a car, right? You're going from 8 cylinders down to Eco 6 cylinders down to 4 cylinders, now electric, and it's one better than the other. Well, they keep changing the technology. So do you need, I don't know, I still like my Hemi. I really am going to cry when I have to give it up, but still what's under the hood is changing. So.
Yeah, and even not to get off track, but in the HF world, there's a pure, I can't remember the name of the software. There's a pure software-defined radio out there, manufacturer in the ham radio world. I can't remember the name of the manufacturer, escapes me, but it's a black box, and you run it into a monitor, and all the software does all the processing instead of all these knobs and stuff and buttons. It's all on the screen.
Yep, exactly. So let's take a look at what you have now too, because you said you've got 8 dongles. You started off with the garbage gray plastic oversized right dongles with probably MCX connectors on it that nobody has in their toolkit, which came with more controls, by the way, which were the first things to hit the garbage. What other RTL based SDRs are you using?
Well, I'm using those new. I like those just for the form factor. I like those little new Alex. They're just this little cube, and they still do have the MCX connector on there. And I'm using those, but the only ones I get are those temperature compensated ones, for sure. So I've got a lot of those. And, for all this receiving I'm still just using those stock 10-inch telescoping antennas. And that's
the magic, though, too.
Yeah, I've got a disc cone in the attic. it doesn't buy me performance really at all versus just using the straight 10-inch telescoping on a cookie sheet, basically, a tin cover for a ground plane.
Right. And again, if you're listening to a trunk system that's got blanket coverage, or they, how they design it for 95%, hip use, right? There's no benefit really on going with an outdoor antenna. If you've got good receive off of what you've got, then go for it. You're not going to buy yourself anything. But again, if you're looking to do more of a conventional world or listen to something that's further out, then yeah, obviously you will need the outdoor antenna. But that's the other thing too. I mean, and again, my setup is that way too. When I'm listening to my local county, I don't need my outdoor antenna. The trunk system comes in great here in my basement. So what do I have? I just use the antenna off the back of the scanner, and it's exactly the same as having it plugged in outdoors.
Right.
So what else are you using?
The ADS-B, that one I did buy the dedicated dongle from FlightAware because it has filters in there, and I think it's got an amp in there, and that I will say, I know it's kind of a plug, but it does make a big difference on range. I've also got the dedicated 1090 megahertz antenna for that too. Also, big impact.
Yep.
And that's probably about it for most dongles that I'm using. I've also done some other related projects with the dongles, not necessarily related to scanning, but still listening to radio frequencies. I've got people out there, your gas meters and water meters, the smart ones that are being replaced. Yes. Those are out on the ISM band, which is up in 900 megahertz territory, I think. I could be wrong on that, but there's free software out there for monitoring that. I've got one of them that runs a job every night on my Raspberry Pi 2 that goes out and scans my water meter because I know what number it is when looking at it, and I can see how much water I've used over every day or a month. And I take that data and run it into an SQL file, and I can graph that. Also, same thing with gas meter too. I can see just for kicks, and I can see I can see a bunch of gas meters from my neighbors because when it's scanning, you can see different meter numbers. But I know which one's mine because I went out and looked at it and said, okay, there's the number. So I've done that, and I've also played around with some. I'm near a kind of a busy railroad, is about a mile from me. There's people using these RTLs for monitoring trains, looking at what's known as end of train detectors or transmitters. And that's kicking out some telemetry. And some guy is out there, he's figured out what the telemetry is and has got a decoder. So I'm starting to do that now with the RTL to see how many trains are going by. So I can count how many different signals I get and do some processing to see, okay, there's a block of signals. Each block of signals is a train. So I can say how many trains are going by each day.
Interesting. It's a lot you could do. I mean, I've seen people do passive radar with these things too. Like they'll point one antenna at a known signal, like a FM transmitter tower, right, for broadcast FM, and then they'll point a secondary antenna at a busy intersection, and based off of the reflection, they'll see how many cars are passing through an area.
Sure.
So it's ridiculous what people are coming up with. Even as far as I know, there's SDRs that can transmit. Hack RF is one of them.
Yep.
But there's I guess over on the RTL-SDR blog, they've got this for directional finding SDR that's got software that can tell you which direction a signal's coming in. And then some people are doing crazy stuff with weather sensors or just looking at key fobs or the sensors
tire pressure
inside
monitors.
Tires.
Yep. I can read those. I found that software too. I can scan my car's tire pressure monitors.
Yep. Even by that, you can just scan how many TPMs are going past the house, and you know how many cars are on your street. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is amazing with it's a side effect of all these software developers. They come home at night and they say, well, what if I could do this? And they take their knowledge and apply it and say, and it's amazing what they'll put out in GitHub.
Yes. But again, too, you have people who are doing these kinds of things, and then this is how they get involved in the scanner radio hobby, because they are, it's like the Hackaday type of thing. And you find this type of project on hackaday.com, and then the next thing you know, they go, oh, I can listen to the police and fire traffic. Oh, let me just tune that in really quick. So a lot of people are finding their way in that way.
Yeah. And if I was, if I was you, and if I was out by, one of the coastal areas, I'd be grabbing one of these things to try and pull some AIS traffic off boats.
Yes.
Because here in Minnesota, I'd have to go up to Lake Superior where there's big ships and that are AIS equipped. But if I lived up by there, I'd be scanning that for sure and plotting that on some map or something to monitor ship traffic.
Yeah, I used to be right on the bay when I was at my parents' house, but for the last 18 years, I've been right in the middle of the island, so my reception's kind of dived down a little bit. So I changed over to aviation because I'm right near a couple of airports. But yeah, it's amazing the kind of things that are being picked up here. So even I don't know if you play around with it too, but a lot of the guys get very interested now in these geosynchronous GOES satellites because they're just constantly downloading data, images and weather data and that kind of stuff. So whatever part of any type of hobby you want now, it seems like SDR is making their way into it.
Yep, I've done that too. I used the RSP-1 to pull NOAA weather satellite data. They've got all the sites out there that'll show you the pass, and I hook that into the disc cone. And if that thing is going to come over my house, I can pull a pretty good signal off that thing. It's amazing. That and
it is.
I've been able to pull off slow scan TV off the ISS when they've been transmitting.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
that's all SDR. That's all. And with stuff like that, here's what's awesome about SDR. You've got the waterfall. You've got the spectrum. You've talked about Doppler shift before. You can see it. And that's something you can do with a hardware radio with just a basic LCD screen. I can see as this thing's approaching me, I can see the frequency change. It's on top of me, and I can see the frequency change as it's shifting past me. So you can visually see this isn't just made up stuff. This is really happening.
Right, exactly. And you can compensate for it, or you can even run software that will plug into SDR Sharp that will compensate for the drift for you. So all you have to do is set up your SSTV decoding software, let Orbitron feed SDR Sharp, and you can come back and the next day and see all the SSTV images that you've downloaded from the ISS as it passes overhead.
Yeah.
So it's almost to the point where it's fun, but it doesn't have that challenge anymore.
Right. But if it wasn't for SDR, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't even attempt it because you need the visual to see, hey, I can see this thing drifting. I can see the signal coming in. I can see the signal getting stronger. It's getting closer. Oh, I need better change my bandwidth here so I capture it all. And I can move the bandwidth along as it's picking up the scan. So it's like I say, it's learning.
You don't need the SDR though to pick up SSTV. I've done it plenty of times with just the ICOM PCR 1500. I just park that on the downlink frequency and just let it go. So I just let it run 24/7 with the squelch wide open, and it picks up good enough. You're going to get some artifacts in there. It's not going to be perfect, but I don't have a Yagi antenna pointed at the ISS either, so I'm still going to get artifacts in there.
Right.
So, it's just to know you're doing this kind of stuff with a $30 piece of hardware, as opposed to a $600 piece of hardware is crazy.
It is. Yeah, it is amazing.
Did you know there are ways to help support the Scanner School podcast that doesn't take any time or any extra money on your part? If you go to scannerschool.com/support, you will find we have several ways that you can continue to do your online shopping and help support us. We have links to Amazon. If you click on our link before you go to Amazon, anything you buy from there will help support Scanner School. Now, if you're in the market for a brand new scanner, an antenna, other accessories, we have links to Scanner Master, where you can not only purchase a scanner and accessories, but you can also get your radio programmed. And by clicking on our link before you buy, you are helping to support the podcast. Now, if you're in the market for software, we have links to Butel. And if you want something new to you, we also have links to eBay. Again, just go to scannerschool.com/support before you make your purchases, and you are helping to support Scanner School at no additional cost to you. This session of Scanner School is sponsored by East Coast Pagers. Now, East Coast Pagers is one of my online companies, and we are a Unication, Apollo, and Swiss phone dealers serving the North American market. Now, if you're looking for a personal use pager or one for your department, we can get you a quote at the very best prices. So why does a company like East Coast Pagers support Scanner School? I think that every scanner radio user should at least put one pager in their collection of radios. The reason why is very simple. It frees up your scanner to just do scanning, and then you have one radio that's dedicated to your local fire activity. Now, with a pager, you can have voice storage. You can do tone outs. You can keep it silent. You can go back the next day and listen to what you've missed overnight. It's more than you can do with an out-of-the-box scanner. And with today's pagers having multiple frequencies and even having multiple channels in a scan list, like the Unication G1 can do 8 channels in a scan list. It has 64 memory channels, and out of the box, it comes with 11 minutes of stored voice and a desktop charger. The G2s to G5s, they do P25 Phase 1 and Phase 2 in simulcast environments with stored voice, paging on conventional and P25. Oh, and they're upgradable too to DMR Type 1 and Type 2. They are more rugged than today's consumer-based scanners. And with a pager like a Swiss Phone S Quad, you won't even realize you're wearing one. It'll help keep you informed as to what's going on in your neighborhood. So again, eastcoastpagers.com or contact me directly, Phil at eastcoastpagers.com. Do you have a new scanner? You're having problems understanding how it works? Maybe you're new to the entire Home Patrol database of programming and you can't figure out Sentinel. Did you get a new SDR and you're trying to figure out how to install it? Or you want to learn how to use Unitrunker, DSD+, maybe set up a PieAware, or even just make some changes and you don't understand how the system and the equipment works? The podcast might be great for you, but maybe you need a little bit more of one-on-one help with setting something up. I'm available to do just that with you with our private tutoring sessions. You can book me online by going to scannerschool.com/consulting for a 1-hour session. And it's great because we can actually share computer screens remotely, and I can guide you through step by step as if I was sitting right next to you. So again, book me for an hour at scannerschool.com/consulting for your scanner radio one-on-one tutoring session. National Communications Magazine is your personal library of scanner, CB, GMRS, FRS, MURS, and two-way radio articles written by the best minds in the business over the past 3 decades. Your NatCom personal online access account allows you to download the newest issues of America's Hobby Radio magazine, as well as back issues too. So visit natcommag.com to download your free sample issues and sign up today. That's natcommag.com for National Communications Magazine. And let's talk dollars and cents here, because you were saying that you had a $350 handheld radio, right? The 325 P2. Mm-hmm. And that worked semi-okay for you, but you don't know what you're missing until you know what you're missing, right? You don't know what you don't know until you don't know what you don't know. And it wasn't until you started tuning around with Unitrunker that you discovered that you were missing conversations, really. You had an idea, right, that you were missing conversations because you'd hear the radio drop out, but you don't know what you're not picking up if the scanner never goes there. So that was an investment of, say, $30, right? $35 to get it delivered to your door. And the software was free.
Right.
And then you go ahead and you throw in a second, which isn't required anymore either, right?
Right.
But say you throw in that second dongle. Now you're at $65, $70 tops. And that is working much better than your $350 radio. And with everything that you can do with the software now, that's putting the SDS 200 and the 100 to a challenge in my book.
I couldn't agree more. And I liked the 325 P2. I liked it. The interface was okay, but I'm like, this would be great. I can take it. It's portable. I've got, conventional. I've got great band coverage. But based on what I was seeing, and then I remember you saying on one of your podcasts that I got an SDS 100 sitting next to it here, and right next to it I've got, I don't know if it was a 996 P2, and you're like, I'm missing stuff on that. And you said I remember it was like 50% of the calls. It was pretty remarkable difference.
Yeah, it was up there. I compared my TRX-1 to a 325 to a 436 to the SDS 100. And yeah, it was very shocking to see how different they all perform. So, yeah. Yep. So what are your plans for the future for software-defined radios? Would you have any other projects up your sleeve, or are you kind of content right now?
I'm kind of content right now. I still have this desire to put this stuff on a small mini computer like a Raspberry Pi or similar to. And I bought a different mini computer. I bought something called an Odroid XU4. And the reason I got it is because it's got lots of horsepower. Because if I'm going to run trunk recorder, I need lots of horsepower to manage those, different recorders. And I've had some success with it, but I haven't been able to quite get it to where I want yet. I'm still having some issues. It runs a different flavor of Linux. Mm-hmm. So you know how different Linux versions are. I've got Ubuntu on a couple of the other ones, and this is a different flavor of Linux customized for that little computer.
Yeah, once you get started into that, that's kind of where you start running the problems. I mean, 'cause again, that was the same deal with the Raspberry Pi. It didn't run Ubuntu; it ran, the Raspbian Pi or something like that, and then it had something else that it ran. So it's tailored to that specific hardware.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I keep playing around with Trunk Recorder because Trunk Recorder is a bear to set up with. If you got multiple dongles, you got to try and set your right frequency range for each one, and I keep tweaking with that because you create these frequency blocks, the spectrum that you measure cover, and you don't want them to overlap each other. And I keep playing around with that and basically just tuning it, for lack of a better term, and playing around with some of the other settings to see if I get better performance. Mm-hmm. But I still have to run that on the old laptop. The other Raspberry Pi can't handle it.
And again, too, you're running it on a 12-year-old laptop. Mm-hmm. I mean, what does that tell you? You don't need something crazy. Again, you said you bought this other supercomputer, and I just put together a new computer here. I just finally put it together this past weekend. And again, it cost me, I'd say, close to $2,000 by the time I threw every piece of hardware into it. But I mean, I built this to be like a big machine. I didn't buy it or build it for a budget project. I figured if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it and go all out. And it will be running most of my SDR stuff, as well as ProScan and other pieces of software, like my weather station and stuff like that. But again, like you're just saying, it's a 12-year-old laptop, and a laptop can just run with the deck closed and it's off in the corner. It's low footprint.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of horsepower. Like I say, it's 12 years old, and when I bought that, I bought basically the cheapest thing I could get back then. It's only got, it's a penny, it's dual core, 2 gig of RAM, and I'm running Ubuntu on there, and I can run Trunk Recorder and RDI scanner on there all day, and no problem.
Right, and that's one thing I wanted to touch up with you too as well. And you keep dropping the hint, reminding me, and we keep getting sidetracked on here. But operating systems, right? We said your first mistake, right? We joked around about was Windows, and again, I just installed Windows 10 on this machine because it's a forced necessity in the scanner radio world to have Windows, right? Everything runs on a Windows, whereas in the software-defined radio world, as you hinted before, a lot of the software is cross-platform. Not all of it, but a lot of the software will work on multiple platforms. And again, if there is no software that's across platform, there is a solution for the platform. So like GQRX will run fine on Linux and also on your Macintosh, your Apple Mac, right? I was in Macintosh, date myself on that one. But so you can run SDR software on all three machines here. And that's how I think you're stretching the lifespan of that old laptop, is by falling back onto Linux and not using something that's, I assume you're not running the graphical user interface, right? You're probably just running the command lines to launch all the software.
No, I am using the GUI.
You are?
Ubuntu is on GUI, and I launch from terminal windows.
Gotcha.
Because I got to have two things going on at the same time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I always use the ampersand in
sure.
terminal.
Yeah, you could do it that way too.
Yep. But yeah, I made plenty of scripts in the old DOS batch file days and also Linux. So it's another fun part of the project. But so you find out most of the stuff because we're going through your hardware, right? And Raspberry Pi, and this other piece of software you have here, and also your laptop. Now it sounds like you're pretty much in a Linux environment when it comes to your Raspberry Pis.
Yes, Raspberry Pi, and that's what the software right now.
I meant SDRs, yeah.
Yeah, and the SDRs, yeah. And that just seems where these developers are doing this stuff is inside Linux. Mm-hmm. Like, say, the Trunk Recorder, OP25. SDR Trunk is the only one that you could go between. Like, say, it's platform agnostic because it's a Java applet.
Right.
You can run it on Windows or you can run it inside Linux environment. But that's just the environment where it is. And The documentation on some of these developer sites is pretty good, but there's a lot of head scratching and what do they mean by this? And what does this do if they pass all the variables on the command line? So there's a lot of experimentation, and there's been some late nights where I just, you get frustrated and say, I'll come back to it some other day.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes getting up and doing something different and coming back to it makes the light bulb go on. I've had plenty of those types of experiences. And again, like you said, I forgot the semicolon at the end of the line, and that's enough to break the code. I've had that happen too many times, and even as many times as it happens to you, you still forget, and you still, like I said, you better off taking the hammer in the garage to your thumb.
And Linux is even more literal, I've found, than Windows. Linux is case sensitive.
Case sensitive, yes.
You get it wrong, it just isn't going to work.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It is 100% case sensitive. But again, that makes Linux interesting too. Plus, there's a lot more you can do with it. I mean, I've done some crazy stuff with Linux back when I was really into it. But it is fun. But again, you're not dedicated to just Linux when it comes to the software-defined radio. So that shouldn't stop anybody either from doing it. But again, too, maybe it could be a nice little gateway drug into Linux and learning how that operates, because Linux isn't scary. It's not one of these operating systems that it's got a bad rap that, it's difficult to learn, but it's especially with an operating system like Ubuntu, and you have that GUI interface and it was built around to get you used to going from Windows into Linux. You learn, most people learn how to use their Android or their iPhones. I mean, it's almost kind of the same, right? You just learn to use something that's slightly different.
Right. Yeah. And from the other, like I say, when I've got that RSP1 with the SDR Uno software, that's their software defined interface for their black box. That is, to me, that is one of the best, I'd call probably intermediate level SDR user interfaces for what it can do.
Yes.
You can do it. You can do rudimentary scanning on there. You can say, I've set up a bank of DMR areas where to capture, because I'm not capturing that on the RTLs. So I can click on there and run that output through DSD Plus and listen to DMR traffic on there all day, every day using their interface. And you can see it scanning back and forth, and you can really tweak your settings. You can set delays. There's just a lot more detail you can do in there, and it's got the benefit of the easy user interface. So I've spent plenty of time on there, scrolling through VHF and up to UHF and see, is there something, like you've alluded to, the gold is in the searches. And
the secrets are in the searches. Exactly.
I've never found this. What is this frequency? Oh, this is somebody's talking here. I'm like, what is this? It's not listed in radio reference. Okay. And I can record there too if I want. So I think that's a great piece of software that they've got there too.
I mean, their software is phenomenal. And what's really nice about it too, if you have a couple of minutes, what you can do too is, if you don't have their hardware, is you can interface it to a new ELEC or the RTL blog version 3 or something else, so that you can understand how their software works. It's not fully functional because there's specific things that the horsepower is not there in the SDR, but it is amazing software that they have, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and like I say, they've got a built-in scanning module in there that's just for scanning, and load in your different frequencies and just scan through there and watch it. And you can set your sensitivity levels. So if the signal's really strong, and like I say, the big part of SDR to me is I can see the signals. I can see if they're strong. You can look at a signal, even tell if it's digital or analog, or if it's analog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can just, how it just pops on, it's off, and then is this narrow band, is it wide band?
Right. And that reminds me too. I mean, a lot of the stuff that the first thing I get somebody to do when they get an SDR set up is tune to the FM broadcast band, right?
Right.
And what's the first thing you see? Well, you see the FM broadcast signal, but you also see off to the sides the HD radio carriers that are off on the sides. And again, who thinks about HD radio if you live in the world like I have? I don't have any HD radios. But again, with an SDR, guess what I can tune into? I don't have to buy the HD radio interface.
There's software out there for decoding. I believe it's NRSC. There's another, it's the Linux, and I think there's even on Windows, you can do NRSC 5, it's called, and you can listen to HD signals.
Yep.
Because each station, some of the stations will have 3 or 4 stations.
It's amazing. Yeah. Yep. And again, you would never know it existed. And when you start tuning in the band on, and it's very easy to see, it's like, oh, there's something else here. What is this?
Yeah.
And that's sometimes that's just enough of a carrot hanging, dangling in front of somebody and say, okay, go find that now. Go play, go poke around.
Yeah.
And it really does get somebody interested in finding something new. But again, too, even software like FMP24, which is part of the DSD Plus package, I helped somebody recently over a tutoring call set up DSD Plus. And he's like, well, show me what else is out there. And I said, all right, okay, let's go look. And we just started clicking, through the spectrum. And he's like, oh, this, and we started, what frequency is this? What frequency is that? And we look at the database and we find out, oh no, that's supposed to be for your local hospital. It's down the road. Mm-hmm. It's an analog channel, but I'm seeing a Moto Turbo control channel here. Hey, They must have switched from analog to DMR, but nobody's ever updated the database. Why don't you listen to this for a while and see if you start hearing security on there, and then you can go ahead and submit the updates. So, it's, again, what you're saying, to be able to see the signal, to be able to see things over time. Again, it's one of these deals that, and what I like too about SDR, and I've been saying this for a while too, is just because there's encryption out there, right, doesn't mean that the hobby is dead. And,
there's plenty of content out there.
And exactly right. And that's how you find it, right? And again, too, just because your favorite TV show is off the air, does that mean there's nothing to watch on TV, right? Like, that's what I like to say. That's what I like to compare it to. And if you grab an SDR, you'll see just how much more there is out there. Yeah, okay, your favorite TV show is no longer on the air anymore, right? But, I mean, years have gone by since that TV show has aired. You can't catch the police department on reruns like you could on a TV show, but there's other things to watch. And if you're watching a waterfall display on an SDR, you will find other things that pique your interest. Like, for example, I was listening to something I thought I'd never listened to before, was the local NXDN trunk system had school buses on it. And again, it's, who cares about listening to school buses, and they do their morning pickups, but it was entertaining because they would think like, they can't pick up Billy today because they're running 5 minutes late. Somebody better call the house before. And then you go, somebody better, I got reamed out because nobody called Billy's mommy to tell him I was running late. Or you find out, the roads are really bad, or, the whole fleet is late, or, and you just find out how bad the traffic is in certain areas just by listening. So instead of having to hear about the car accidents on the police band, you're getting it from the bus drivers because they're the ones that are out there driving the local roads. Right. So the commentary is beautiful on it. So again, it just gives you something different to listen to. It's a different perspective.
A lot of the towing around here is on DMR. So bad day, snow, all it takes is an inch of snow on the road, and there's going to be accidents and stuff. And you can hear the tow guys go here, dispatch this, and you can hear all their commentary on what they see or what they don't see. And it's pretty interesting.
Right. And a lot of what I like to do too is, when we go back to the Unitrunkers stuff like that, is lock out all the talk groups and then wait to see what comes up new, right? Or define the talk groups. And especially when a new system is being built, right? We have a couple of new systems here in the area that are being phased out and replaced by P25 systems. And just to be able to go in there and say, okay, this is new now, and just start logging those talk groups, or finding out what radio IDs are on existing talk groups that you've already defined, and then marrying them up to the new talk groups that you don't know, because maybe they are encrypted talk groups. And you can say, well, that must be surveillance, narcotics, because I see those narcotic radios on another talk group that's labeled narcotics. Again, these are visibilities that you don't normally get on a scanner, because most scanners will just, like the Uniden lines, they'll mute out the encryption, right? They'll just move on. And again, I don't want to listen to it on Unitrunker or DSD Plus or Trunk SDR, but I want to know it's there, because I want to document it and I want to see who's using it. So it gives you, again, the secrets are in the searches. So even though I'm not listening to it, I still know what's going on. And again, I have a whole system here with all the PD is encrypted, but I went through the entire system here and I marked down, because I could figure out by looking at the radio IDs what they were each. The radio IDs were lined up to a certain car. And I was able to find out, okay, well, these radio IDs fit the format of vehicles. And I break out my scanner radio digest book, whatever it was that I have. And I look at the unit numbers and I say, okay, well, that's this kind of radio, this is the Humvee, and this is the ESU unit. And this must be a operations channel for ESU, when it might be their extreme ops channel or something, just for example like that. Or you find, the paddy wagon or something, it must just be for the medical examiner. So there's other things out there that necessarily you don't get hits on all the time, but you do see somebody register on that channel. And sometimes it's a glitch, right? You just decode something wrong, but you find that out really quickly too, because as months go by and all you have is one hit on one talk group with one radio ID. Okay, we filter that one back out. But to see stuff like call to call or radio denials, those are cool. Or to watch a system actually melt down, you don't see that on a radio because you don't know what's happening. But you will see nothing but red text on DSD Plus that says registration failed, right?
I've seen that
walls
before.
Of text. Yes, I've seen it before too.
I haven't seen it a lot where you see where somebody must be trying to key up and it's like, sorry, there's no frequencies open right now.
Right. But I've seen it though where the police are on now, where, they're encrypted, but before they actually roll completely over, they were simulcasting on UHF, and it was dead quiet. And I'm looking at the trunk system, and it's just a wall of red. And I'm like, yeah, somebody at Motorola is getting a phone call in the morning. They haven't already gotten one right now.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah, there is some interesting out, like say, well, you can do that with SDR where you can see, hey, there's a signal. Whereas, I grew up when probably you did too, is how do you find stuff? Well, you grab the scroll wheel and you keep scrolling through till you hear something, and maybe you see something, maybe you find something, maybe you don't. But if something popped up, you just went past, you won't know it. Back in the old days, now you can go, wait a minute, I was just there and I just saw a transmit, just almost peg the meter on the spectrum display. Let me go back there. There is something there. And you can mark it and put it in your scan bank on the SDR software and say, if it pops up again, it'll stop there.
And what's a perfect example of that is aviation and mil-air, because they come and go so quickly that if you don't have, again, if your scanner's in search mode, you may miss it because it's the other end of the spectrum. But your waterfall over time will show you repeat hits over the last couple of minutes, and then you can find out what's going on there. Again, like you said, you put that frequency now into a scan list on a regular scanner or another SDR running, software with a scan list on there, and you can start finding out, there's new activity in my area. So it kind of helps you out. Exactly what you're saying. You can see things, and it really does help you out with the visuals and seeking things out.
Yeah. And then, like you say, you get to the, like the RSP1 here, where you've got 10 megahertz of bandwidth. You can see, instead of just seeing 2.4 or 2.5 megahertz, RSP1, I can see 10 megahertz. That's a pretty big swath.
Yes. And that was my first realization that I was getting a little bit overboard with the SDR hobby. Wasn't the fact that I was buying boxes full of the original DVB dongles that now are in a waste pile somewhere. But when I first sat down, I went, you know what? I'm going to buy myself an AirSpy. That was my first investment. Okay, $199. I'm really spending some money now on this. And again, I think it's 5 megahertz and 10 megahertz, depending on which software you would use. But to be able to pull that information off the air was like, holy cow. It was enough where, because my 9-to-5 job was with AT&T, and I was like, well, I can build these now. We're buying these, spectrum analyzers and stuff like that to look at the LTE signal. And I'm like, we're spending thousands of dollars on this, and I just bought a $200 receiver, and I'm using this free software, and look what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the LTE signal. That's all I'm looking at, though, because it's only 10 megahertz wide. But I can see the signal in there and see if anything else is interfering with it for $200. Right. But again, now all of a sudden, you start really spending more money, and I have 2 AirSpys and the SDR Uno and a Hack RF and a stack of new Alex and a stack of the RTL Blog V3s. You just keep buying, because again, it's like you buy the more expensive hardware that does more, so you can free up more of the smaller pieces so that you can do other projects with them. And again, just like you, I've got the FlightAware dongle, right? I've got the 1090 for that. And I have a new Elec plugged into there to do the UAT stuff. And again, I've got that on a dedicated Pi on the 2 antennas that FlightAware sells. And so and again, these are all tiny little projects, and you can just keep adding and just keep adding and keep adding, and you don't have to destroy the other stuff you have. So again, the PiWare stuff, $65 for a Raspberry Pi. Was it like $35 for the one dongle? And then you need a micro SD card and a power supply and a case for the Raspberry Pi. All said and told, what, $125, maybe $150 tops?
Yeah, with a case, and a power supply.
Yeah. and you've got yourself your own ADSB decoder, and then you say, well, for another $30, let me just slap on the New Elect dongle and I can decode UAT, which is exactly what I did.
Yep.
Because it's not going to cost me much more at that point. And all of a sudden, it's like, this. Have I looked at it in the last couple of weeks? No, but it's still feeding information. So it's so cool.
Yeah, you go on the FlightAware's website and say, "Yep, I'm feeding it. It's showing hits. It's receiving signals."
Yep. But not only FlightAware, you can open up, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's documented that you can feed that to Flight Radar 24, and you can run Plane Plotter, and you can send it to what's the other one that ADSB Exchange, right? You can set up ADSB Exchange, and again, one piece of hardware now has given you 3 premium memberships,
Right.
Between FlightAware, ADSB Exchange, and Flight Radar 24. So at that point, your monthly, what you're saving monthly on a premium membership on all those sites is cheaper than the one-time cost it costs you for the hardware. So, yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So this is, again, just the tip of the iceberg. And as you can tell from our conversation, it's pretty exciting. And even though we're both doing a lot with them, there's still a lot more out there we're not doing.
I would agree that some of this is in its infancy. It's going to just keep getting better and better. And, someone's going to come out with better hardware. Hey, I can see 50 megahertz of bandwidth here all the time. And you're like, okay, wow, and they don't need to and pipe it into the software, but it's really going to be the software that owns it. And who can do that, whether it be a hobbyist level, somebody, a privateer who does it on their own time, or if it's an actual company like Uniden or Whistler says, we're going to make the UI, we're going to commit money to this, we're going to do updates. It'll be interesting.
Yep, it definitely is. So with all that said, is there anything else that you got up your sleeve?
No, not in terms of SDR. I'm probably maxed out right now for that, unless I learn more.
But Greg, I want to thank you so much for, again, this was your idea. So I want to thank you for reaching out to me and volunteering your time to be a guest on the podcast. If anybody's got any questions about what you're doing, is there any way that somebody can find you, either via a Twitter feed or a website or something like that?
I don't have a website. I do have a Twitter handle, which I'll give to you here. You can put in the show notes, and I'll give you an email too that people can reach out if they are stuck on something and or just have some general questions. We can do that.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll add that into the show notes and also on the post roll that's coming up right after you and I split. But again, I want to thank you for taking the time and spending about a little bit more than an hour, I guess, at this point, discussing the exciting world of software-defined radios.
No problem, Phil. Thanks for having me, and appreciate your efforts on the show.
All my pleasure. Thank you so much. Greg, thank you so much for being a guest on today's podcast and sharing how you got started with the software-defined radio and reminding me about how easy things are today when we talk about software-defined radios. It was fun trading stories with you about how when we first, both of us, got started with software-defined radios, just how difficult things were and how unstable the hardware was. And thinking about how the hardware and the software has matured to where it is today, it is so much better than it used to be. And if anybody was afraid to start because of all this stuff they've heard about, how difficult things were, I hope that the stories that you and I traded today kind of put those thoughts at ease with anybody who's still struggling or thinking about getting into a software-defined radio part of the hobby. And if anybody's interested in getting into SDR, again, I have a free webinar coming up at scannerschool.com/webinar. We're going to talk all about software-defined radios and also our courses at courses.scannerschool.com, where we have a free SDR training course. Now, if you want to be a guest on the podcast, just like Greg was, and share what it is you're doing or talk about something that interests you in this hobby. Again, there's a lot that goes on in the scanner radio hobby. I've had plenty of podcast guests, and I would love to have you on the podcast as well. Go to scannerschool.com and click on guest on the top of the page. Now, again, you can download the session notes by going to scannerschool.com/session168. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you get all of the podcasts delivered directly to your podcast player. Or if you're listening to us on YouTube, make sure you click on the subscribe button and click on the bell so when next week's podcast comes out, you are notified. And if you want to help us help more people, the easiest way to do so is just by sharing the podcast. Share this podcast with your friends, your social media channels. Retweet our tweets on Twitter, and just follow us around and just give us a like and a share, et cetera, et cetera. That helps more people discover the podcast, and in turn, we can help more people with the Scanner Radio hobby. Again, that is our goal here, and we need your help to help us reach our goal. So with that, my name is Phil Lichtenberger, and this is Scanner School. We teach you everything to know about the Scanner Radio hobby. We'll catch you all again next week. 73.